All right, so part one. Why focus on behavior anyway? Why do we need to focus on this? Well, there's a variety of different reasons. First of all, in the United States, we have a bit of a problem. 12% of beginning public school teachers leave within their first 2 years. That climbs, though, to 50% within the first 5 years. And this is a challenge for our nation. It's a waste of resources on an individual level for students who are in pre-service, who spend years becoming certified to teach, and then end up leaving with the field within just a couple of years after getting certified. It's also kind of a waste of resources for us on a national level as we think about investing in our teaching force. When we think about why teachers leave, for those of you that are in the classroom already, this may not be a surprise to you, but when we talk about why teachers leave, and we ask them, why are you leaving the classroom, most frequently teachers say the same basic things. They don't have the training that they need to teach successfully. They don't have the pedagogical training to break down their content area and feel like they're being effective. But then beyond that, the rest of these really have to do with behavior. The school environment feels poor or punitive. There's student behavior and motivation problems. They weren't trained in classroom management, and in their current school, they aren't getting support for handling behaviors. And so they don't feel like they even have time to teach. And so that gets to be frustrating, and once people realize how hard this job is, a lot of people are bailing on the job in general, as opposed to really thinking about how we can improve teachers' classroom management skills and hopefully keep some people in the classroom who have been through all of this training. So teaching is hard, and before we really dive into the specifics of behavior, I want you to pause for a minute. I find it helpful to step back and think a little bit about why we continue to do this hard job. And this is my answer. I truly believe education is the most powerful weapon that we have to change the world. And it keeps me motivated when it's hard. And I want you to think a little bit about, despite the fact that this is a hard job, why do you do it every day? Or why do you want to do it if you're in a pre-service class situation right now? All right, so as you're thinking about why you teach, use this video. Watch this video about what makes an effective teacher, and think specifically about a classroom that you were in as a student that you would describe as the most effective classroom or the most effective teacher you've ever had. And note the word effective here, not the teacher you necessarily liked the most or who was the most fun, but think about somebody who taught you the most over the course of your educational career. Think about what were the characteristics that were in place in that classroom, and what kinds of things did that teacher do that really led to a lot of learning for you. So use this video, think a little bit about what the environment of the most effective teacher you've had is, and jot down some ideas in your workbook.
Who's the one person's behavior in the classroom you actually have the ability to control and influence? Your own. That's why you're all so good. The worst teachers, when they give a quiz or a test or a homework assignment and the students do poorly on it, the students doing poorly is not the variable. It happens to every one of us, doesn't it? It's the response to the students doing poorly that's the variable. The worst teacher, when they give the quiz or a test or a homework assignment and the students do poorly on it, who do they blame? The kids, last year's teachers, the parents, hip-hop music, MTV, drugs, cable, society today. The kids all drive, the kids all have jobs. Divorce rate. I've learned if we're waiting for the divorce rate to fall to zero before we start teaching these kids, we're going to be waiting quite a while, aren't we? And it's that willingness to accept responsibility. Great teachers and poor teachers want very different things when kids misbehave also. Did you know when a student misbehaves in a great teacher's classroom, do you know what that great teacher wants? Prevention. They want it not to happen again. And when a student misbehaves in a poor teacher's classroom, you know what that poor teacher wants? Revenge. They want a public bloodletting. Did you know great teachers and poor teachers want very different things when students are sent to the office? Did you know, I know you won't believe this, but I promise it's true in some of the surrounding school districts. Did you know that poor teachers want students leaving the office mad? I had to teach my teachers, hey folks, we don't want kids leaving the office mad. Can I let you in on a secret? They came to the office mad. Some of those kids came to school mad. They walked into your class mad. If you want a whole bunch of kids coming in your class mad, please let me know, because I'll tick them off and I'll send them in there. And you know why we never want students leaving the office mad and we never want students leaving the office embarrassed? Because they'll get revenge. And not on us, because we're all such big, tough adults, but they'll get revenge on somebody, because hurt people hurt people. And you know why we care about great? Because we're in education. See, I love it when the clerk at Walmart is nice to me. That means a great deal to me. I love it. But my kids' teachers had better be nice to them, because it's so much more important. And we knew that when we chose education. What is it great teachers do differently? One thing great teachers do differently is they understand it is people, it's not programs. Do you all know if you have great teachers, you have a great school? And do you know if you don't have great teachers, you don't have a great school? And nothing else is ever going to determine that? But isn't that funny how we think programs are the problem or programs are the solution? People are the problem and people are the solution. People are always going to be the problem and people are always going to be the solution. Do you know why programs come and go in education so much? Because whatever the new program is, the crummy people can't do that one either. That's the reason. You tell me what on earth program you're going to bring in that's going to fix the worst teacher you've ever known. There's no chance in the world it's going to do it. But you know what happens when we bring a new program in? The very best teachers get invested in it. They start to believe in it. They start to bring it in their classroom. Ineffective people can't do it, so you know what happens? They now yank the program out and tear the scabs off the good people. It's like block scheduling at the high school. What's your choice? Do you want an ineffective teacher every day for 50 minutes, or do you want the ineffective teacher every other day for 90 minutes? And we're going, block scheduling didn't seem to work. I don't see what the problem is there. It's the most amazing thing.
All right, so chances are you jotted down some words like this. You talked about a teacher who was inspiring to you, somebody who challenged you but also took time to listen, somebody who empowered you to think big thoughts but also held you accountable for hard work. And so as we think about those things, I like to call some of those are fantastic goals, and that is absolutely what we're going to try to aspire to in every classroom. But these are a little bit fluffy. I don't really know what it means to inspire somebody or even really to challenge them. So our job in this course is really to take some of what these big words, these big important goals, and break them down into the concrete skills that teachers use to create an environment that is inspiring and challenging and motivating all at the same time. So over the course of the next 8 modules, we're really going to dive into the specific actions that teachers do to create this type of an environment. So think about that environment as you go through. Think about the specific actions those teachers engaged in that made you feel comfortable and allowed you to learn in that environment. And hopefully that's what you'll be able to see us break down for you as we go through this module and the rest of the modules in this course. So if we think back, the goal of teaching or the goal of education is student achievement. And I always say this, but I don't mean student achievement in a narrow sense, like achievement on a state achievement test or a high stakes test of some kind. What I mean is achievement in life. We want to produce students who are able to participate in their families and in their communities in meaningful ways. And that requires good teaching. That requires good pedagogical skills to break down content, to provide direct instruction for students. But it also requires classroom management skills. And these two things go hand in hand. We can't have good teaching if the kids are off task. And we can have compliance, but if we don't use that time to fill it with good teaching, we aren't going to actually see student achievement change. And behavior problems we know disrupt learning, and engaging instruction actually is one of our very, very best strategies to prevent problem behaviors. If a student is engaged with you in the lesson that you're teaching, by default, they're not engaged in problem behaviors. So we want to just start this module out and this course out with the message that our goal is overall student achievement. And classroom management and the skills that we'll talk about in this course are one small piece of that. They're an important piece, but they won't impact student achievement alone. We need to make sure we pair it with the good teaching that you'll learn about in the other modules and good curriculum support and things like that will actually lead to the changes in student achievement levels. So we know that when we do behavior support well, good things happen for kids. When we do effective behavior support, we see an increase in appropriate behavior. So kids are on task more, they engage in more pro-social interactions with peers and with adults. We see decreases in inappropriate behavior. Kids are off task less and they engage in fewer disruptive behaviors. And I think this is one of the more important pieces when we know that when we do behavior support well and when we use that time that we buy back to fill it with good instruction, we see increases in academic achievement. Kids are more engaged and their actual learning levels increase. So behavior support is a really critical foundation to good instruction, and that's why we're going to spend some time focusing on it in this course. So bottom line, we're going for student achievement. That's our ultimate goal, and it requires both classroom management and good teaching in order to get there. The good news is we really know what good classroom management looks like. We have decades of research that tell us that these are the 5 critical features of classroom management. Maximizing structure in your classroom, having and teaching expectations, actively engaging kids in the classroom and in your curriculum, having a continuum of strategies to respond to appropriate behavior and acknowledge students who are doing the right thing, and the flip side, having a continuum of strategies to respond when kids are engaged in inappropriate behavior. And these are the strategies that we'll go into in a lot more detail as we move further into this course. We're going to break down each of these for you and give you specific examples of how to do these. But this is the 5 critical features of classroom management that will be the foundation of everything we do. Unfortunately, despite the fact that we know that what those look like, we are really not doing them very well in classrooms. And there have been a number of studies, the results of which are in this table here, that demonstrate that even though we know what these practices look like, in the majority of classrooms, we are not engaging in these practices at rates that are anywhere close to levels that would be effective enough or intensive enough to change students' behavior. And so part of the problem that we need to focus on isn't just teaching people what to do, it's really supporting the implementation of those practices. And so that's where when we talked about setting your own goals and thinking about how you're going to implement these practices as you go through this is where it becomes really critical. It's not enough to just know what good classroom management looks like. It really requires that next step, some coaching support, some self-management supports to really help you implement these at a level in your classroom that will lead to student behavior changes. Part of the problem that we've run into with teaching and supporting classroom management is the fact that for the most part, teachers have not been trained in what this looks like. And so we're really starting out with a situation where teachers don't know what good research-based classroom management practices look like. We did a quick review of the literature to look at which states require some kind of classroom management instruction. And the good news is, I don't know why this isn't 50 across the board, but most states require some level of instruction for new teachers in classroom management. The problem came in when we asked the question about, does that instruction need to be about research-based strategies? And really, when we looked at that, we're down to about half of states, or just over half of states, that required that in order for a teacher to become certified to teach, they needed instruction in research-based classroom management practices. So what this means for you is that it's likely that if you went through a pre-service program, you did not receive training in classroom management, or that these specific research-based strategies may be new to you. It also means that if you're in a position of coaching or supporting new teachers, we can't assume that teachers have been taught this content. We need to start by teaching this content directly and supporting the implementation of this. And I think this is a big piece of why we don't see the implementation levels that we would hope to see in classrooms, because we aren't teaching people to do it. And so it's not a big surprise when teachers aren't doing it. There's a number of challenges with the way that we've handled problem behaviors historically in schools. And I want to just pause and think a little bit about that. Traditionally, behavior was something that we reacted to in schools from a reactive stance, so zero tolerance. You don't deserve to be in this classroom unless your behavior is at a level that meets my criteria, or you can't be in this school unless your behavior meets the specific criteria. And we used a lot of reactive management where we just kicked kids out, sent them home, suspended and expelled them. And in a lot of places, this is still the case. We're still doing this. There is a lot of non-evidence-based practices out there with respect to classroom management. Everybody has a theory about how to improve classroom management, but very few of them are actually evidence-based and have research to support them. We've not historically used data to guide our decision-making when we implement classroom management practices. We've just said, try this, figure it out, and if it doesn't work, then that's the kid's fault. There's nothing about checking the implementation or using the patterns of behavior that the kids are engaged in to adjust our implementation. So this has led to a lot of problems in the past as well. As I've mentioned, we haven't really invested in supporting classroom teachers' implementation of these things. We typically use a train and hope approach where if we do provide training, we just say to the teacher, here, go do these things, see you later, and hope that they're able to engage in those. All right, so there have been a number of challenges with our past practices. Let's take a close look at this get tough approach and maybe think a little bit about why it doesn't work and why we continue to engage in it. If you're working in a classroom, this is probably a scenario that's somewhat familiar to you. A student acts out in some way. They're calling out, they're challenging the teacher, they're not engaging in their work. And the teacher then corrects them. please stop doing that, gives them some sort of initial consequence or a warning at least, and says, I need you to stop doing that and please do your work. In some cases that works, but often what happens is a student becomes more disrespectful. Don't tell me what to do, I want to do it my way, something like that. When that happens, the teacher then says you can't be disrespectful in my classroom. The situation is escalated, they say you need to go take a break, you need to either go out in the hall, go to a partner teacher's classroom, or in more severe cases, go to the office, and they leave the classroom. So the student is now no longer in class. So let's take a look at this cycle, because this is something that plays itself out in classroom after classroom, day after day. And it's a really common scenario, regardless of what the specific student behavior and the specific teacher response is, the basic cycle plays itself out. So what does the student learn in this situation? Take a minute and just think a little bit about what the kid has learned in this situation. Yeah, the kid has learned how to get out of class, right? So if the kid is in a situation where the work is hard, or they're in a situation where they don't like the teacher, or they have a challenging peer relationship in the class and they want to get away from it, they've learned how to do that. They have learned how to get away from this work and spend time outside of class. More importantly, though, for why we continue to engage in this, what does the teacher learn in this scenario? Yeah, the teacher learns that they can get this kid out of their classroom and they can continue to teach. When there's somebody in your classroom who's disrupting your instruction, that's a really frustrating situation to be in, and getting that kid to leave for a little while allows you to instruct the rest of the class, which is a really reinforcing thing for us as teachers. So this is a mutually reinforcing cycle that we engage in on a regular basis. It works for the kids and it works for the teachers. Unfortunately, though, this get tough approach, when we engage in this on a regular basis, doesn't lead to good long-term outcomes. So even though it's working for us both as teachers and as students in the short term, when we engage in this cycle over time, what we do is we foster an environment of control where it's really about just teacher compliance. We actually trigger and reinforce antisocial behavior in kids. We give them opportunities to practice inappropriate behavior and practice challenging the teacher's authority in the classroom. We break down relationships, and I think this is a really key piece, that it is really hard to develop a positive relationship with students when we are engaged in this aversive get tough cycle. And we're saying you don't get to stay in my classroom because your behavior doesn't meet a particular standard, or you don't get to engage in the instruction that I think is so important for you because your behavior got in the way. So it really devalues both your relationship with the kid and your ability to teach them their academic skills that you're working on. So long term, this particular approach does not lead to good outcomes for either kids or adults, but in the short term it works, so we continue to engage in it over time in schools. We know, though, from a long science of behavior that students are not born with bad behaviors. It may feel like that when there's a student in your classroom who's acting out, but that kid was not born acting out. They do not learn new things when they're presented with what we'll call contingent aversive consequences, or punishments. When we just punish a kid, they don't learn new things. It might stop the behavior in the short term, but it doesn't teach them what to do instead. It doesn't give them an alternative, another way to get their needs met. It just shuts down that communication. It potentially shuts down that behavior, but could also make it worse. It shuts down the relationship, and it shuts down the learning. What we know from a long history of behavioral science, though, is that kids do learn new ways of behaving when we teach them directly and when we give them positive feedback on that new behavior. And the good news for us as educators is that we know how to do that. We know how to teach and we know how to provide feedback. It's what we do when we teach reading, it's what we do when we teach math, and we just need to apply that same basic idea to teaching behaviors and really thinking about how do we teach kids to receive what they need in a more socially appropriate way. How do we directly teach that, and how do we provide positive feedback? I do want to correct one big misperception, though, that we're coming at this from a positive behavioral intervention and supports framework, And oftentimes people have the misconception that PBIS is really all about rewards. And we will spend some time talking about reinforcing behaviors and providing rewards for students, and that certainly is a powerful tool we can use. But I want to make it really clear from the very beginning of this course sequence that the power of what we're doing is actually in the teaching, not in the rewards. That actually teaching kids a new way to get their needs met in a more socially appropriate way is the more powerful part of what we do. The reinforcement is what helps them continue to do it over time or help them try out something that's hard in the first place. But the real power of what we're doing is really in the teaching, not in the rewards. The logic behind what we're doing and the way we'll approach overall behavioral support is this, and that is that individual student behavior, so one kid in your classroom, their behavior is linked to the host environment or the school climate. So this classroom environment, the school environment, impacts that individual student's behavior. And climates and classrooms that are effective, efficient, relevant, and durable lead to improved individual student behavior. And so we're really going to focus on changing the classroom environment to make it more likely that this individual student who's struggling in your class is going to be able to select and use the appropriate behaviors in your classroom to get their needs met. It's a little bit of a shift from the way we sometimes think about behavior. We're really going to focus on changing the environment and changing the adult behaviors as opposed to changing the student or trying to manage somebody else's behavior. We're going to focus on creating an environment that makes it more likely that kids are able to be successful. We're going to give you a quick overview of what PBIS is. PBIS is a data-driven framework. It is not a packaged curriculum. There is a lot more information that you can learn about the overall school-wide framework, but we want to give you a sense for how we use this data-driven framework big picture so that we're going to apply that then to your individual classroom. So when we're thinking about using the PBIS framework, it starts by identifying some specific outcomes that are important to you and to your students in your classroom. So in this case, it might be about implementing effective classroom management practices. It might be about improving the student behavior in your classroom. Those might be the outcomes that you would select. Next, you're going to think about what data you need to know whether you reach those outcomes and to guide whether or not you're making progress. You're going to select some specific practices. These are the things we do with kids. What are the things we're going to do to support kid behavior change? And then we're going to think about what are the supports that teachers need or the systems of support that teachers need to be able to implement those practices successfully in their classroom. So those are things like professional development supports, coaching, self-management supports. Those are the things that will help you implement the practices that you're going to use in your classroom to change student behavior. And then the data will guide your implementation of both of those pieces. All of these things, though, need to be done in a way that is contextually and culturally relevant. And so we're going to talk about 5 critical features of classroom management as we go through these modules. And the critical features don't change across age groups or across different demographic groups, but the way you implement them will need to change a little bit. You're going to need to adjust your implementation to match the needs of the particular kids in your classroom. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that as we go through. But the whole idea here is just to get you thinking about our basic approach to behavior, thinking about how we're going to select outcomes, use data, practices, and systems to make sure we're really supporting equitable outcomes for all kids and making sure that we're really improving their behavioral outcomes as well as their academic outcomes. So I want you to pause for a minute and respond to this discussion board post. This is an opportunity for you to interact with your colleagues with whom you're taking this course. Think about a time when you may have seen a Get Tough approach used in a school or a classroom. Maybe you were engaged in it, maybe you saw it in a classroom that you were observing in. Did it work? Remember, we talked about sometimes it works in the short term. Did it work in the long term? Did it stop that behavior from happening overall? Was this approach effective? Why or why not? And share your initial impressions of the PBIS logic. Does it make sense to you? Do you have questions? And then spend some time reading through your colleagues' responses and helping direct them to resources and helping think through how they can deepen their understanding of the way this Get Tough approach plays out in classrooms and what the PBIS logic really looks like.